Hello and welcome. I'm Sara Gibbs, a Standards Development Manager for BSI. I oversaw the development of BS 30417 Provision of Inclusive PPE Guide. Today we're exploring the journey from Chartered Institute of Building's PPE That Fits campaign towards BS 30417. I'm delighted to be joined by three amazing guests who I'd like to introduce themselves. So Sandi.
I'm Sandi Rhys Jones. I was president of the Chartered Institute of Building between 2023 and 2024, and I've board for women in construction for longer than I can remember, and this is so important. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Nadine?
Lovely. I'm Nadine Buddoo, editor of Construction Management's People section. I was involved with the launch of the PPE That Fits campaign and promoting it over the last 2-3 years now. And yeah, it's fantastic to be here and to see the standard actually here. It's fantastic.
And Stephanie.
I'm Stephanie Einen. I'm head of Standards Makers Engagement and Inclusion at BSI, and a big part of my role is looking at how we can make standards development and standards more inclusive. And talking about the need for inclusive PPE has been a 10-year journey, and talking about the fact that standards have an important role to play in solving that problem. And so I'm beyond excited to see this standard finally launched. So.
Thank you. I think it's really important for us to understand the origins of why we came about having this standard and how the PPE That Fits campaign came about. Sandi, could you start us with why inclusive PPE in the first place?
Well, I dived back into my archive because, as I say, I've been involved formally in improving construction generally, but particularly for women, and the whole question of decent working conditions. And back in the late 1990s, an architect who worked for Alan Conisbee, a firm of consultants, decided she would design her own protective equipment for women. And she held a fashion industry show at City University. And I thought, great, we're getting somewhere. Nothing happened. Roll on to 2009, and I was running a dining club for senior women in construction. And we got together with the Association of Women in Property, Women's Engineering Society, Women as Role Models, and some Arabs and some other people, and developed the Purple Boots campaign and persuaded Dunlop to produce some decent working boots. And it sort of happened, but it was all tiny. And meanwhile, the issues carry on. What happened was I had a platform. And it's so important to seize a platform. And when I joined the presidential chain at CIOB, which is a 3-year vice president and then president, I thought, there's a platform here. There are people, there's some influence. How can we use this? And as I was thinking about this and talking to our head of EDI, I then came across a message from an old friend of mine, an engineer, Kathy Simpson, who was incandescent with fury because her daughter was doing a welding course, and it wasn't until the last week of the welding course that they got round to finding her fireproof clothing that fitted. And that was it for me. And I thought, right, we're going to get together and try and drive it forward. So I held a meeting at CIOB, and that led to setting up how we began saying, we must do something about this. And we'd also had COVID and everything else. So it's taken a while, but what was important was finding an opportunity to bring people together and then use a platform more visible. And Nadine was an important part of this, but I'll leave that to Nadine to join in here.
No, that fits perfectly across for you, Nadine. How you've obviously seen it in the media quite a lot, and how it's progressed and everything like that. It's just a case of what experiences have you seen that really stand out for you? What made you want to get involved so much?
I think for me personally, I've worked as a journalist reporting on the construction industry and the built environment for over a decade. And as Sandi's already said, sadly, we're seeing a lot of the same stories again and again and again. And you think, oh, there's some really great work happening here and there's going to be this big shift, and then it doesn't happen and it kind of falls a bit flat. Or you see people doing great work, but it's kind of happening in these silos. And then you think, well, okay, so how do we make this bigger? How do we actually make a real lasting impact? And so for me, we were working alongside Sandi, CIOB and construction management coming together to launch the PPE That Fits campaign. It was really important that it wasn't just a kind of a really flashy kind of one-off campaign and then we just move on to the next thing. It was about really looking at some of these real life stories and giving people across the industry an opportunity to really share their experiences. And that's a combination of both good and bad things. You know, what are the really great success stories where people are doing great work? And also, where are there some companies where actually they're lagging behind and we need to do better, and what are some of those challenges? For me, the things that have really stood out, hearing how many people go to work every single day and do not have the right PPE. Fundamentally, that is a very serious, concerning safety issue. The idea that you're going to work, your health and safety is at major risk because you don't have the basics of the right PPE is insane. We've heard so many people who've said, you know, trousers that are far too long, having to roll them up themselves. That means that sometimes the high-vis strips aren't visible. Massive issue, trips and falls that can happen, having kind of face masks and having to almost kind of alter them yourself because they don't fit properly. So there's that element which is obviously fundamental to the campaign. But then for me, one of the things that has stood out has been hearing the stories from people that say, actually, going to work every day and not having the right PPE makes me feel, am I really valued here? Do I belong in this industry? You know, if I say to my employer, well, I don't have the right equipment, and they kind of say, sorry, it's too expensive, or, oh no, just get by, you'll be fine. That doesn't make them feel very valued. And I think particularly for construction, and I know this is relevant for a lot of sectors, but construction employers are facing huge skills challenges. We cannot afford to lose these incredible people. So the idea that something as basic as ensuring that they have the right PPE could be the difference between them deciding to go elsewhere is just so important that we get it right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we have so many experiences that we can talk about, but you're right, we should be celebrating the good as well as the bad.
Absolutely.
Stephanie.
So I did mention the 10-year journey, and I almost feel better because hearing Sandi and how long her journey has been on this. But I think for me, it was every single event that I went to, someone came up to me to talk about PPE and the challenges they face with getting PPE that fits, which if it doesn't fit, it's not fit for purpose. And that coupled with doing a bit of research and realizing that this isn't just an issue in the UK, it's a global issue. It's not just an issue in the construction sector, it's an issue in every single sector where PPE is worn. There have been reports dating back a number of years by the TUC, by Women in Global Health immediately post-pandemic, by any number of organizations that have actually done research into what is the problem. I think what was fascinating for me as part of the journey is the complexity of identifying sort of the causes behind the problem. So when I went along to the roundtable hosted by CIOB, this is when we started talking about, okay, but what there has to be a solution that can start to solve the problem. So what does that look like? But so looking at things that Nadine has already mentioned around employers assuming that there's an increased cost for differently sized PPE or slightly different PPE, or employees not being able to speak up because they don't feel that their employer really wants to hear that they're having these challenges, and or when they do speak up, sort of being told, oh, well, it's no big deal, just get on with it, you know, make it work. And so on, and a general lack of awareness of what the challenges actually are, that actually some organizations have no idea that their people are facing these challenges, and that they're actually putting not just the person wearing ill-fitting PPE, but everyone around them is then at risk. And I remember distinctly a young crane operator who was at the round table who said, imagine operating a crane with gloves that simply do not fit. here's a person operating heavy machinery that puts everyone on the site at risk and cannot properly manipulate the controls of that machinery because of the gloves she's required to wear don't give her the manual dexterity that she needs. I mean, you almost have to ask yourself, how can anyone not see what the issue is? But it comes back to, employers not being made aware by their employees because employees don't feel they can speak up. Employers perhaps just generally not being aware, despite the number of articles, research reports, and et cetera, that have come out over the years. And so it was just incredibly exciting to be part of that roundtable and to come up with the start of an idea of something that might be able to start to make a difference. It is a complex problem. There isn't a magic silver bullet, but I truly believe that this standard is a huge step in the right direction. So yeah, it's just incredible to be here to talk about it today.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I know obviously how much you put into it, especially within BSI internally and pushing it, everything like that. So thank you. Sandi, I'm going to talk about how we've gone from talking about it to how we actually processed into creating the standard itself. What did you feel the process was like, moving from raising awareness to actually influencing the creation of a new British standard? Any pivotal moments you want to talk about?
Oh, I think moving from talking to doing. That's the recurring theme in so much of this. I mean, we've heard everybody saying we've been talking about this or thinking about this, and fine words don't butter parsnips. It's what do you actually do? And I think there were some wonderful moments. I mean, I remember meeting Stephanie at the Houses of Parliament on one of the terraces.
Yes.
Randomly, and just meeting, and there was a click, wasn't there? And there was a, yes, PPE. And I thought, I'm not mad, here's somebody else. This is interesting. And at that same meeting, there was an interesting woman who said, oh, don't get me started on PPE. Turned out she was a barrister. And she said, I often need PPE. And I said, why? You're a barrister. And she said, criminal law. And very often you end up on a building site when there's a criminal case, and I have to wear PPE and it doesn't fit me. And you suddenly see the relevance of this to so many walks of life. What were the pivotal moments? Well, meeting Stephanie was really important because it was a standards institute with somebody who felt the same. So you begin to think, here are some movements that we can bring in. I think I knew there was a great network of people who wanted to do something, but what was the machinery? Having a head of EDI appointed at the CIOB was really important, and he worked at getting data. You have to have data. You make these things work with hard facts, and a sense of humour helps. So if you make a joke about looking like a clown climbing up a tower crane, you get engagement, and then you get the reality of it. So we had some data, and then Nadine and construction management and CIOB people, you were amazing, saying, we can do something with this, and hosting the round table, and we brought in people from different sectors. So we had this, it's very important to make it broader. This isn't a special interest. This isn't just women. This isn't just one particular industry. And those stories were so important. But I think what was also really important was having the data, having the stories, and then saying, what can we do right away? And that was the resources. So where do I go for this? So very quickly, we got in with this campaign to saying, if you're looking for this, here's a list of manufacturers, here's a list of companies who get it. So we began, I think, do you agree with that, Nadine? It was immediately something that was happening rather than, and we are going to do a campaign. So that was pivotal. And then getting some involvement from overseas as well. We're getting evidence from America, getting evidence from Australia. The other thing important for me, and I think it's really important to work across industries, I thought for once the construction industry could be ahead of the game. For once we could be leading instead of playing catch up and being that difficult industry, that, you know, it's all a bit difficult. And if you can't get a job on site, Kevin, and it's all a bit like this. We could actually drive forward and say, this is important, why don't you join us? And that was really helpful, because it made it a big issue. And it's not pink it and shrink it. It's how do you make sure that people are safe, and how do you work with companies to show them that, okay, you've got a purchasing department, but do you really know what they do? And that story, was it at the round table? I can't remember, Nadine, where some chap said to me, the central unit only goes to certain manufacturers, only buys certain sizes. I go and buy it myself, and then I put a chit in and petty cash. It's the only way I can get proper PPE. So there are people who want to change, so you help them do it. So I think those were the pivotal moments, realising we had a platform, we had players, we had a drive, and regulation is not red tape. Regulation is there for safety.
Absolutely. Nadine, do you think that the media helped with the kind of awareness of the issue and everything like that? Do you think it's going to challenge or support what we're trying to achieve here?
Well, from our perspective at Construction Management, we are hugely committed to helping to support this. And I think it's important, I'm going to echo a lot of what Sandi has said already. From the outset with the campaign, it was important to frame this as, this isn't just a women's issue, this is an everybody issue. There, as we've spoken about before, if one person doesn't have, as Stephanie said, if one person doesn't have the right PPE, the knock-on effect is that everybody in that vicinity is at risk. So ensuring that we are constantly kind of banging the drum to remind people that this is about everybody has been hugely important. And obviously using all of our platforms to continue promoting those messages. And touching on what Sandi has mentioned in terms of launching the PPE that fits.com, that kind of resource of suppliers, manufacturers that people can access, and that is independently verified by Catherine Evans at Boulders Brass. So there is that resource there, and that was our attempt to have kind of practical tools that people can use, as opposed to just saying, oh, PPE, inclusive PPE is important, and that's the end of it. Okay, what next? What are the tools that we can give people? And that was kind of another step towards, obviously, the ultimate is coming to the delivery of the BSI standard. I think also from our perspective, this has never been about kind of denigrating manufacturers for not providing PPE. We know that there is great equipment out there. There are people doing the right thing. There are also a lot of employers who are really willing. But as Sandi has said, there are so many that go, oh, I don't really know where to begin. And so for us, it has been constantly just driving that message through that there is something you can do. There are tools, there are resources that you can access. We can help kind of promote them and shine a light on them, and bringing all of those voices together. And ultimately it is constantly sharing those real stories, those experiences that people have in the industry. I think for us, the kind of the data is obviously very, very important, but I think that has to be backed up with those real life stories, because I think that's what really resonates with our audience. We want to hear, okay, what are the good things that are happening in the industry? What are the things that we need to work on? What are some of those challenges there? And hearing those experiences from people in the industry, I think is really, really important.
The million-dollar question here. So, Stephanie, you noticed straight away that we were a bit of a gap in standardisation and where we needed to be with it. How did you feel at that point, and what we needed to do about it for BSI?
I think I mentioned at the beginning that it's a complex issue. There are a number of reasons behind why you wind up with someone in a role with PPE that doesn't fit properly. And so there was never going to be a magical solution. And in fact, standards are also complex. So you would have a set of standards that are for the production and manufacture of the PPE, dictating sizing guidance and all manner of different things. Then you have another series of standards that are for the testing protocols and processes. And ultimately, all of that needs to be looked at to ensure that whether it's how you're testing or what types of body forms you're testing on, that all of those things enable you to be able to provide equipment that will work equally well for any wearer. And so it's about different head forms if you're testing any kind of headwear and whether or not it's effective and all of those kinds of things. And so it isn't so much per se that there's a gap in standards, it's about how inclusivity can be systematically embedded in standards, particularly in standards that have this type of direct impact. And it's really a journey for the whole standards ecosystem. It's not simply something at BSI. Across the board over the past 10 years with the work I've been doing around gender responsive standards, for example, what we've learned is that the system emanated from a very technical type of work and with a lot of very detailed technical expertise. And there was often this mixed connection that ultimately people are impacted by standards. But if you're talking to someone that's designing the gauge of a railway track, for example, which is where we first started, it can sometimes be very difficult to make those connections. And so the right questions at the right point in time in the standards journey didn't necessarily get embedded to enable people to think about, well, hang on a minute. Is this going to work the same or equally well for every single person that might be using this or wearing this or impacted even just by this standard, whether directly or indirectly? And it goes back to, I think everybody's already mentioned data. It's the fact that there's a real scarcity of inclusive and representative data. And in fact, this has been recognized by the EU, and there's a whole initiative going on at the moment to collect representative data. And so when you get a group of people in the room, they only have the knowledge that they have access to, whether that's from their own experience or from the data they've been able to acquire. And I think too often in these kinds of settings where you're bringing together a group of people who are experts, it never occurs to say, well, who was included in that data set that you're referring to? Or when you say, this is the best practice or this is what works, for whom? It just doesn't occur to ask those questions. And so it's about also embedding those prompts, not just for PPE standards, but across the board, enabling people to be able to sort of critically question the information and all of the knowledge inputs that are coming into that process to ask themselves key questions about, for whom? For whom does this work? And more importantly, perhaps, for whom does this not work? So I think that's where we came to. And that's why it was a little bit difficult to identify what's a solution that can have an actual impact almost straight away, because it is so complex. And it was a matter of figuring out where could we start and then what are the next steps to systematically embed this.
Can I come in here? I think the data is so important. At the beginning of this, in this particular, this is the important campaign that started. But when at CIOB they said, yes, as part of your internal working group, you want to make a change on these things. And we carried out a piece of research across the board. It was male and female. We asked people, 46% of the people who responded said they hadn't been given PPE that fitted. So that was the base point. There's been other research since then, including in the States and in Australia, that clearly shows the relationship between accidents and fatalities and errors that were a direct result of not being properly equipped. And then I think you need to turn that into not only the human cost, but the economic cost, because let's face it, follow the money on so much of this stuff. If you're speaking to clients, and I think they're important for our industry, you can say, do you take this on board in terms of procurement? Do you ask your providers what is their policy on providing your workers with this? And the NHS, interestingly, are quite interested in this. And I think it's demonstrating that this has a real impact. It's not only the safety of the people, it's the confidence in knowing you're going to be properly equipped. And then at the end of the day, you're doing a better job. So it makes sense, which I think will take us on to what next, really. But I think having that data is so important because it's not just a nice to know, it's not just being picky, it's not just saying, well, so what if the gloves are a bit baggy? It's the reality. I mean, years ago, I remember a wonderful woman who was health and safety executive, and she said to me, one of the problems with the construction industry is that everybody thinks they're Superman in a vest. And she said, I turn up sometimes on a site and I see somebody on a roof with no harness and no helmet. And she said, I sometimes do it off duty. I just stop my car and I get up and I say, please, please, you must be properly equipped. So there is something there in terms of the attitude is, I don't need this stuff. So it's dealing with that as well. But I think there's a shift. I think there's a shift.
So I would add that's one of the things that I think is partially my responsibility as a journalist to continue shining a light on those stories, those examples where we see constantly stories from HSE where someone has had an awful fall, something awful has happened, whether it's a lifelong injury or whether, you know, it's a fatality, because the right health and safety practices were not followed. And a big part of that is having the right PPE. And it's constantly trying to, share those stories and making it very, very clear. PPE is such a basic thing to get right. And that's definitely part of my responsibility to continue shining a light on some of these stories.
Yeah, and I would add as well that the data from HSE and others around the world is quite shocking, but also very compelling in terms of, again, the cost, the real cost in terms of people's lives, livelihoods, safety, and even, as I said, lives sometimes, but also the economic impact that has is really massive. And so I think the need to continue to really shine the light on the fact that this is first and foremost an issue of safety, but that it also has some very, very significant implications economically and otherwise.
And that's the policy argument, because so often in this, and I think it was tremendous at your launch that you had such great parliamentary representation, because to really shift the dial, you also need policy and engagement at a political level, as well as at an industry level and then at a standards level. It's back to your complexity, but it's pulling all those things together, and I think it's really encouraging to see that happening.
We were very fortunate in that Kirsteen Sullivan, the MP that sponsored our event, she is having to go to an awful lot of sites now and site visits. Yeah. And as a petite lady herself, yes, she is finding such difficulty in acquiring the right PPE. So she's having the lived-in experience of acquiring the stuff in the first place to be able to feel safe. And it's also she's going through the experience of having to ask for it and the awkwardness that we've all gone through, where you feel like, oh, I'm really sorry that I'm having to. Yes. So we're really lucky in that she's having that lived-in experience and bringing that through. But we have the standard.
Yes,
it's here. Sandi, have you seen any early signs of what the standard is meaning, what it's actually creating? Is it causing a ripple effect yet, do you think?
I think it is. I think one of the important things is when people are happy to talk about these issues very openly, and there isn't this sense of apology or, well, do you mind if I raise this? I think it's like other things. It's now open for discussion. I think if you look on a platform like LinkedIn, there is a constant flow. I think the people who've been engaged are expanding their range of clothing. I get quite a lot of contact now regularly from people. I had a contact from South Africa saying, I'm really interested to see this. We're now driving it. Can you provide us with some information? What can we do to link? So I think, yes, it's on the table, it's recognised, and there is a move forward. So I think it's having an effect. It's having an effect. And there's nothing like saying there's a standard. If you say there's actually BS 30417, and oh, it's proper then.
Are you seeing any kind of industry trends starting more as a result of the media?
I think definitely, I mean, we've definitely seen that, as Sandy's mentioned, that feedback, those stories, people coming constantly. I mean, we've received a lot of reader comments, whether it's on social media platforms or, just letters to the editor, and whether people were happy for those to be published or would they just want to get in touch to say, actually, I just want to say, I've experienced this and I'm so excited to see that there's actually progress happening. That is really, really encouraging. I think it's a bit early for me to say at this stage that since the launch, we've got, really strong case studies where employers have adopted the standard and there's a real tangible difference here. So that's something that definitely we'll be keeping an eye on, because it's important that we encourage those employers to kind of monitor progress, track what they're doing, and then report that so that we can have a better view of kind of the kind of real world impact that the standard is having. But it is really exciting. People that I've spoken to have massively welcomed the standard. But also it's that feeling of, on an individual level, so obviously there's employers who are happy to see that, but on an individual level, people feeling actually this really legitimises that call for inclusive PPE, because we can now say, oh, there's a standard and there's something to point to. And I also think that it will support some of those conversations. If you do have to stick your hand up and say, actually, my PPE doesn't fit, or it's really uncomfortable and it's not meeting my requirements, you can point to the standard, and it makes it very, very clear what you should be provided with. So I think that's hugely helpful.
Absolutely. How are we supporting organisations implementing BS 30417, Stephanie?
So I think what's fantastic is that the way the standard was written in the first place is written to make it very easy for organizations to adopt and use. Not only that, it's available for free to download. Anyone around the world can download it and make use of it. And that includes, of course, employees. And the way the standard is written, it's a tool that employees can also use to speak up, perhaps in a more credible way. Not that they aren't credible, it's sharing their lived experiences, but in a way that will be perceived potentially as more credible to the people they need to try to influence in their organizations. And they can say, well, I've been reading this standard, and so I think that's fantastic. We're hosting a series of webinars to help people understand what's in the standard, how they can apply it. We'll be sharing case studies as well of organizations that have adopted it. So I think we're going to be doing lots of things, but I think it started with the amazing group of people led by yourself, Sara, who came together to write the standard and who were cognizant from the outset that they wanted to write something that was going to be super accessible for people, that they could jump right in and start making some changes and some improvements that are going to actually make a difference. So I think that's perhaps the most important thing we've done, but I think also making it available so that anyone can download it, because that piece about the employee voice and being able to come forward is also critical, because as I said, one of the big issues is lack of awareness. So if we're providing a tool that enables people to speak up, or on the flip side, enables organizations to understand what questions they might need to ask of their employees, I think that's a huge benefit alone, and the standard does that. So I think those would be the two things I would highlight most, but obviously there's lots of activities and support behind it to help people adopt it.
Absolutely. So it's here. What are we doing next? What happens next? What would you like to see happen next in both the construction sector and widely to ensure PPE is truly inclusive for all, Sandi?
Well, I'd like first of all to say actually that it's really important to recognise what individuals have done. I think that so often change is brought about by committed individuals, and what's happened with this campaign is that all those individuals have found a tribe, if you like, and they found a platform. And I think the people in the first round table, the people who've come forward, your team, Stephanie's team, Nadine's team, it was a wonderful example of how individuals have finally thought, I've got something here that I can work with. So that's really exciting. As for what next? Well, I'd like to see it carrying on in the way that Nadine and Stephanie have both said. It now grows on. I would like to involve clients And I think there's an opportunity here with CIOB, with the clients, because that's all they need to ask as well and also recognise it. And that will enhance how good companies are perceived. But there's something else I'd like to see now, because I think we've got that. It's ticking over and we can see what to do. I think there is another development from PPE which links to the huge problem we're facing with sustainability. And I think there are issues, particularly globally, on PPE that's fit in extreme climates. I think there's also an issue about how we make PPE properly reusable, how we manage the waste, how we stop landfill filled with PPE that's worn once or that is so rubbish you don't wear it again. So I think the next step is not only PPE that fits, that's inclusive, it's PPE that is sustainable and reusable and fit for purpose. And I think that's the next move forward.
Absolutely. And we're in agreement on that, so that's great. Nadine, the media is obviously well on board with making sure this campaign and the awareness of inclusive PPE, how are we going to keep that going? How are we going to keep the momentum going on that?
I mean, part of it, as I've said before, is continuing to share those stories from the industry, whether it is employees, individual employees, whether it is organisations who are sharing kind of their best practice of what they're doing. I think that's really important. So my kind of call to action for the industry would be, as I've said before, really kind of tracking and reporting on the change that they're implementing within their organisations. How are they working with their supply chains? How are they working with their PPE suppliers? Do they have to think of some really kind of innovative approaches to their procurement processes? And what does that change look like? What are some of the challenges? So we want to hear those stories so that we can continue to shine a light on them. I think one of the most important things going forward is to just continue the message that the standard is fantastic. It is such a pivotal step, but it is that first step. And it's not a matter of kind of, right, we've ticked that box now, we can all pat each other on the back and say, we've done a great job and it's all done. This is the first step of a very long journey. And it's constantly reminding employers that getting the right PPE isn't a matter of, right, we do it once and that's that. No, it's, for the entire workforce, your PPE requirements might change several times over the course of your career. So what you need today might be very different in a year or 5 years or 10 years. And so whether it's kind of weight loss or weight gain, pregnancy, menopause, there are so many things that impact what we need from PPE. So it's ensuring that process is constant. We are constantly looking at what our workforce needs. Are we making sure that we are kind of meeting those needs? And are we keeping every single person on site safe? And that is, the crux of the reason why we're all here, is making sure that every single person that goes to work every day gets to go home safely at the end of the day.
Amazing, thank you. Future for standards, BS 30417, what happens next, Stephanie?
Well, so I think Sandi, of course, raised a very good point about sustainability, and such an important thing to consider. But thinking about what next in terms of really systematically embedding inclusivity across PPE, I think the first thing I would say is what next is to organizations. Don't be afraid and don't be shy. Adopting the standard is not, an admission of guilt of some kind, but yes, maybe you haven't done everything as well as it could possibly be done, but that's okay. Don't let that stop you from making changes, adopting this standard, and doing better in the future. I think, and I really applaud those organizations who have come forward and said, we need this, we're going to use this, we need help with this. And I think that has to be okay, because there is no better future if people aren't, whether it's about sustainability or whether it's about inclusivity, there isn't a better future out there if people can't recognize that there are opportunities to do things differently and to do things better. So I think that's the first thing. Don't be afraid, don't be shy. But I think in terms of standards, generally, it's about looking across the various PPE standards, but also other potentially very relevant and related standards, perhaps clothing sizing systems, for example, and where there are opportunities to ensure that going forward, the inclusion and the inclusivity is systematically baked in by making the changes that needs to be made. Whether it's as simple as, if you're writing a testing specification standard, don't show images that are clearly only men. Because even though you may not explicitly say in the standard, test this on 5 men, or whatever the case may be, showing those images of just clearly males in that sends a message, an implied message, and so it doesn't occur to people to think of, oh, a woman might be in this role, or whether it's about men and women or different sizes, height, weight, other factors. There isn't any such thing as an average human. Whether you're talking about an average man or an average woman, it doesn't exist. So it's because there are changes also, as Nadine mentioned, that are temporary sometimes. So it might be due to an illness, or it might be a temporary weight gain or weight loss, and vice versa. So you can't live in this world where you think that there is this average person. So it's about, how do we systematically embed these ideas into other standards to ensure that when they're revised, as they always are on a regular basis, that they then make the necessary changes. I think I should also be clear that I don't think that there's something fundamentally wrong with standards. This is a symptom of culture, society, and the way standards have come about. This issue isn't unique to PPE or unique to standards. These issues exist everywhere, and it's something that people are grappling with in a myriad of different ways. So I think we also have to really be explicit about that we're not looking to point fingers or place blame, but we do want to see a change happen. And that change, has to be a conscious choice. And the right questions have to be asked at the right points in the standards journey in order to enable that conscious change to happen. So I think, no one should be afraid that, if they find that there's something in their standard that requires a different approach, it's okay. It's okay. The standard is like that for very valid reasons. No one intentionally sought to exclude or to harm. We understand that, and we know that. And I think oftentimes that fear of being found out to be wrong or whatever is what stops people, or what makes people anxious about engaging with these topics. And so I do think it's fundamentally important to be explicit that isn't what we're trying to do here. We're trying to move things on. We're in a different point in our evolution as a society, and now the expectations are also different. Young people in particular, for example, they expect inclusion, no pun intended, as standard. Mm-hmm. They don't expect to have to raise awareness or ask or point out these things in the workplace or elsewhere. So I think we have an opportunity, and I think we should see it as such. This isn't about looking backwards and saying that was wrong. This is about looking forwards and saying we have an opportunity to make things better for the future. And so why not?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been an amazing discussion. Thank you, Sandi, Nadine, and Stephanie, for bringing your experiences and knowledge to our discussion. Really looking forward to see how PPE that fits and BS 304017 progresses in the future. Let's keep working together to ensure that everyone has PPE that fits and ensuring that everyone is safe. And thank you for watching.